I used to work in a sort of gated community that a lot of the rich and wealthy people in the city chose to live in. I'm from Brazil, and these sort of communities are common because rich people don't like living where they can see poverty. They end up building insular communities that have everything that they need. It's a premium experience that only the upper class can afford. When this happened, I was about 26 years old, and I've been recently hired as a caretaker for an elderly couple that lived in one of those wealthy apartment complexes. Carol and Eric, the people I was taking care of, were in their mid 60s and more or less healthy. They didn't really need a caretaker in the first place, but their son Adam wanted some inner peace of mind because he didn't see them often. I guess money wasn't an issue for them, which is why I was hired. My job was relatively easy and I had plenty of time to rest, which I did on the balcony. My main role was to keep Carol and Eric company and act as an assistant to them. It was a good life, and they were one of the few rich people here who didn't seem to have egos the size of elephants. Now, just because the job was easy, it didn't mean that I took advantage of it. I did my best to ensure that they always had everything that they needed and that they were happy and had someone to talk to. Loneliness was really common for many of the older people here, and I often used to see these rich, old women just sitting by themselves on a bench, hoping that someone would come and talk to them. When Carol and Eric had their afternoon siestas, I would pull up a chair onto the balcony. We're on the third floor. And I had a great view of the local community. I often spent time like this, either reading a book or knitting a blanket to keep the time going by. I would have watched a TV show on my phone, but both Carol and Eric weren't fans of seeing me use my phone on the job, even on my break, so I sort of just adjusted my entertainment tastes. Things were going great for the first year, but in my second year as a caretaker, things took a sudden turn for the worst. It all started when whoever was in charge of the place decided that they needed to completely overhaul the security of the community. The current firm was let go, and a swanky new security contractor that had every officer kitted out with expensive looking walkie talkies and gear was hired. Cool, I thought. The more safety, the better, right? How wrong I was. Instead of being focused on safety, they started acting in the most ridiculous ways possible. More importantly, they seemed to have been given instructions to protect the residents and decided to go full out mall cop behavior on everyone who wasn't a resident. The bias shown towards the residents when compared to the service staff and other workers like me was insane. Even when you tried your best to stay out of their way, they would find a way to come and heckle you and ask you to leave if you happen to be anywhere close to the residents. Let me give you an example. One afternoon, I was on my lunch break, and I went down to this sort of open-air garden park that was open to everyone. You had these circular concrete things in the shape of like a moon crescent that people would sit on, and these were everywhere around the community. The moon-themed design featured quite heavily in the community for some reason. I had chosen a remote corner away from the main crowd and activity, and I began to unpack my sandwich. While I often had lunch in the apartment with Carol and Eric, sometimes I needed a change and would eat outside like this. It had never been a problem for the entire year that I had worked here, and no one had said anything. As far as I was concerned, there was no new change in rules as well. I was eating my sandwich, minding my own business, when a large security guard came up to me. "You're sitting in the corner where cars find it difficult to turn. You're blocking the way." "I'm not blocking the way. I'm sitting here on this bench. I'm not even on the road." The dude starts talking into his microphone like he's a freaking cop calling for backup and I'm some criminal. I get up, not wanting to deal with this, and finish my sandwich on the way back up. I reach back up, and Carol and Eric were still asleep. I walked over to the balcony to see what the guard is doing now, and I can see him shuffling around and then posting himself against a tree. I also see one of the residents, a young woman about the same age as me, come over and sit in another one of those moon crescent seats. The guard could see her, but he didn't say a single thing to her. Instead, as he walks by, I could see him nod with a smile as he passed her. This sort of situation started to become really common. It was obvious that they didn't want the helpers loitering around anywhere, and I really started to feel like I was more of a slave than a human being. A few weeks later, I needed to do some shopping and headed toward the mall inside the community. I got there early before my shift had even started, and I noticed the same security guard who had told me to leave hanging around outside. I was wearing a shirt with a front pocket that day and decided to discreetly start recording him in case he pulled anything weird. I started the video and walked toward the entrance. In front of me was a family all dressed in expensive clothes and loaded. The woman and her daughter wore expensive handbags, and they walked in with a polite nod from the guard. Just as I thought, when I tried to enter, I was stopped, and the guard told me to keep my bags outside. I'd already decided not to argue or make a scene because there'd be no point. I had simply decided to start collecting evidence about the sort of discrimination that seemed to be going on with this new security firm. When I watched the video back later, the blatant discrimination was very much obvious. Over several months, I had gathered proof of various episodes like these where rules were applied just for me and the other service staff, but not for anyone else. Carol was a well-respected resident, and while we were friendly with each other, I was always aware of my place as a caretaker. I did not tell her the sort of discrimination I was going through, and the only person I could talk to about it was my manager, who had also faced the same discrimination. It was a closed loop, and I sometimes wondered what was even the point of me recording all of these instances where I got told to leave the area, leave my bags out, and be treated like a potential criminal. Anyway, one afternoon, I was with Carol and she suddenly seemed out of breath. I knew she was asthmatic, so I rushed to find her inhaler, but it wasn't where it usually was. I rushed around the apartment trying to find it, all while her desperation seemed to be increasing. Eric wasn't staying at home at this time, and it was just me and Carol. Realizing that I couldn't find the inhaler, I knew that I had to go out and buy another one ASAP, and I ran down the 3 flights of stairs. My heart was pounding as I raced past startled residents. I was headed to the pharmacy and was almost there when I felt a hand suddenly grab my arm, which caused me to trip and slam my face into the ground. Dazed, I followed the hand that was still gripping me tight, and I discovered it's the same a-hole security guard. "Caught you, you thief. Where do you think you're running off to?" The way he said it was much more derogatory than the translation conveys. "Let me go," I yelled quite loudly. This is a very quiet and posh place, and the incident quickly caught the attention of everyone around us. The guard twists my arm, and I yell in pain as he pushes me face down on the floor while starting to empty my pockets with his other hand. At this point, a small crowd has gathered, and some people are starting to tell the guard to ease up on me. I'm yelling at him that I need to get to the pharmacy because Carol needs her inhaler. He won't know who Carol was, but many of the people watching did. They immediately tell him to let go, and he suddenly realizes that he messed up. That a-hole guard pulls me up and tries to defend himself with some BS about my suspicious behavior, but I ignore him, wrench my arm free, and he lets me go. I run to the pharmacy, get the inhaler, and I run back towards Carol. When I reach back, she was still gasping, but able to breathe somewhat. I ripped open the packaging, set it up, and I helped her take it. Once she was in the clear, I collapsed down and I began to cry. I tried to control myself, but I couldn't, and the tears were rolling down my face. I was so drained and exhausted, and I could feel the sticky feeling of blood drying on my forehead from the fall. Carol got out of bed and tried to comfort me. She was asking what happened, so I told her everything. I told her how I and the other workers had been treated like criminals and thieves when the new security firm took over. I told her how much it hurt me and how I could even show them videos of all this happening. I proceeded to show her some of the videos, and I could see her blister with anger. She had me immediately forward them to her number and told me that Adam is a doctor and also a pretty big donor to the community. She promised that she would get him to do something about this situation. I was exhausted, but I thanked her earnestly. She told me to take the rest of the day off and relax, which I gladly did. That weekend, Adam visited us. Carol had me explain the entire situation once again, and he shook his head with disbelief with each incident that I retold. He then had me come along with him, and we went to the overseer's office where I had to retell everything that had been happening about the behavior of the security guards. Adam also showed them the videos that I recorded. I half expected the overseers to not be on my side, considering the way anyone with power seems to be an authoritarian here. To my surprise, though, he apologized for what I and the others had gone through, and he said that these videos were going to be extremely useful. I didn't know what they would do, and to be honest, I didn't have much faith, but I guess Adam has some considerable influence here. The new security firm was let go, and they decided to hire back the old firm. I also ended up getting an amount of around $2,500 from the community due to the injury I received, which was really unexpected. The amount was quite significant and made my life much easier because I was able to pay off several of the debts that I owed. Thankfully, I never had to deal with any more a-holes like them again, and I even managed to make some new friends with some of the other residents after the incident, which I never thought would happen. Life can be really surprising in the most ironic ways sometimes. So, I thought working in a library would mean I was safe from Karens, but boy was I wrong. I work in a small town library, though my focus is program coordinator. I do the basic librarian works helping patrons put books away, etc. Now, for years, as told to me by my senior coworker of 11 years, we've charged people for print jobs as paper and ink cost money, nothing expensive, like 25 cents for black and white papers or 75 cents for color. Reasonable amounts. And I think that most I've seen someone pay is like $15 for a stack of files. Now, the week before this, we had a mother and her adult son that came in and they've been printing things off. This town is pretty good, so we often give people their printouts and just remind them to stop by the desk when they're done. And since most people finish their print sign-off and come to grab them, they're already there to pay for it. So they print off their few sheets and then the son comes up to grab them. I go to show them to him, and he snatched it out of my hand and walked away back to the computers. I ended up just saying as he walked away to remember to come to the front desk when he's done to pay for it. They continue printing, and the printer, which is behind my desk at staff only, it's close to the open entry behind the desk, so we have to remind people a lot that they can't just come take it. It's staff only. My desk is in the back room, so I can focus, but I have a clear view of the print from my seat. After another print, he came and grabbed it himself, and I told him, once again, as he walked away, to please not do that. I unfortunately went home shortly after this as I had been feeling sick since I started the shift. But later I received a message from Vereen who told me that they had printed about $7.75 worth of printing, and they just walked out. The mom going so far as to cover her face with her hat in a fake attempt to not listen to my coworkers who were telling them to come back and pay for it. I am so sorry for the long setup, but now on with the story. This all happened a day ago. It's near the start of the day, and our head librarian, who's the manager, lets Vereen and I know that she's not going to be in that day because her vertigo is acting up. It's not a big deal. My coworker Vereen and I are pretty chill, and we can hold the fort down without any issue. It's a small town. Now, after that incident last week, we were told specifically that if they come in, that they were not allowed to receive any of their prints until they paid for them. Well, sure enough, they came in that morning. Because I knew that there was a risk of him just grabbing while I wasn't looking, I basically set up this little cart and rolly bag to sort of semi-block the entrance to the staff. So he'd make a noise and I would see him. He comes back up to the desk and asks for the prints. I explain that he will need to pay for them before he can get them. He just says okay and walks back to his desk. That's where the story should have ended, right? Well, I wouldn't be on this subreddit if it was. About a minute later, his mom, walks up to the desk, and before I can finish, Karen, where's your manager and your supervisor? Me, I'm sorry, ma'am, she's not in today. Karen, she's never in. I want to know why my son has to pay for the prints. He's never paid for them before. Me, ma'am, I can assure you this system has been in place for quite some time. Karen, well, I've never heard of it. I took a few steps back and placed my hand on a labeled sign that we have in plain view of anyone who walks by the front desk, and therefore everyone sees our clearly labeled prices. Me, ma'am, I can assure you that this sign has been here for at least as long as I've worked here, though I knew it'd been quite a few years. Karen, I've never seen that before. At this point, Vereen had come over knowing something was up, and it begins once again. Vereen, what's going on? Karen, I'm not paying for prints. We've never paid for prints before. Vereen, it's been like this for quite a few years. Karen, that's ridiculous. It's free. Me, ma'am, we have set prices. Vereen, paper and ink cost money. Unfortunately, our words slightly overlapped, and Karen, you're both being very rude, and I don't need two people talking to me at once. One of you can talk, and the other can shut up. I looked to Vereen. I'm younger, so I had a feeling that she would barely listen to a word I said, so I sort of gestured, and Vereen nodded. I stepped out of the conversation and went to help other people in the library. At some point, Vereen had gotten her to come to the front counter and began the paying process. I didn't overhear Vereen mention the incident for the last week, to which she claims not hearing them. She tries to claim that she doesn't have $2 in change to pay for the prints, but my coworker assures her that we can use a card. Soon, she gives up, but demands to know when the manager will be back. We explain that she'll be back in the next day. Karen huffs and then tells her son that they're leaving. I call out, "Have a nice day," as they left, which really got a good chuckle out of Vereen. Later, we mention all of this to another coworker who says that the son has paid for prints before, which reminded me of a time I had helped him too. Some people just don't make sense to me. Update 1. Karen did come in and complain to my boss, but nothing has really come of it. But a week back, I heard she was causing trouble at the police station, demanding to know why they won't let her carry a concealed weapon. Update 2. Just yesterday, her son was in the library when 2 officers showed up asking if he knew where his mom was, as they were attempting a wellness check on her. The poor kid did seem confused, as he ended up pulling up Google Maps and showing the cops a picture of her somewhere in Vancouver. They ended up leaving with him, taking home to check on her. I'll update if I learn more. Update 3. The son has been in many times, renting movies and using the computer. Never printing though, but his mother hasn't been back since.